Thank you so much, Josh, for that brilliant reading. I'm going to hand over to you, Mark, with some reflections on this.
I have, yeah. What we thought today is myself and Claire, we've had a read through this passage, and we've just got some thoughts that really spoke to us and challenged us, actually, well, challenged me. Yeah. And so we're both going to take it in turns, really, to see different reflections on a same passage. But a way of introduction, Thomas, I guess if you've been a Christian a little while, you'll know Thomas had a nickname. We'll often say Doubting Thomas, and I think that's even a phrase, isn't it?
Or
if someone questions something.
Oh, you're a Doubting Thomas.
And it's a little catchphrase that's become synonymous with Thomas. When we think of Thomas, we think of Doubting Thomas. Actually, in the Bible here, it said he had a nickname, but it wasn't Doubting, it was Didymus, which means the twin. So he was nicknamed the twin. You were nicknamed Penfold. I was nicknamed Sparks, and he was nicknamed the twin. And I think the name that he picks up now, Doubting Thomas, he gets a bit of a bad press. So when I read through the Gospel of John, he didn't always doubt. He had a phrase which he said to Jesus. He said, Jesus, I will even die for you. And he was willing to give up his life for Jesus. And then when I look through the history of what became of Thomas after this Bible verse, he went on to become an amazing missionary. It's probable that he went on to India and died in India telling other people about Jesus. So in a way, Thomas was willing to sacrifice his life before this passage. At the end of his life, he gave his life for Jesus. And he just had this little window where he had a wobble, and he doubted and he panicked and he lost some of his faith in that window. He went through a season of doubt. Yeah. And for me, that's quite encouraging, because it means that actually he might have been a man of faith later and a man of faith before, but he still had seasons of doubt. And so my little question is, well, what can we learn? What can we learn from those seasons of doubts that we might or inevitably will go through? And I've just got 4 really simple points. The first is this, that doubt is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think doubt can be a real positive thing. Because when we doubt, it demonstrates or shows us that we've hit the limits of our faith, or the perimeters of our faith. We've pushed in a certain direction so far that we've hit a wall of our faith. Doubt shows us where we've hit the perimeters of our faith. And that got me thinking, if I never doubt, it probably means I've not quite yet pushed myself to the limits of my faith. Doubt for me is positive because it just shows me that I'm hitting right on the edge of where my faith begins. And for Thomas, when he pushed into the limits of his faith, when he came out the other side of that, the doubts actually propelled him to grow in his faith. Secondly, from this reading, I asked the question, well, why did Thomas start doubting in that moment? What was the cause, or what was one of the things that led to that doubt? Well, it's quite clear. It was Thomas wasn't with the rest of them. All his mates, all his buddies had seen Jesus, but for some reason, Thomas wasn't there. He wasn't in community. He'd got a little bit isolated and disconnected. And in that place, his doubts were allowable to grow and become amplified. And I think that's true for us. If we become disconnected from our family, our Christian family, our brothers and sisters, it's really easy in that moment for our doubts to become amplified when we're alone or away from others. And so I'd encourage you, if you want to wrestle with doubts, do it in the place of a church family. Get stuck in. Don't allow yourself to become isolated from a Christian community. One of the things that follows on from that, my third point, is Thomas is really bold, actually. When he's having doubts, it's almost like he's pushing back at his buddies and his disciples. He's saying, I won't believe unless I take my fingers and place them in the wounds of Jesus' side. I mean, he's kind of aggressive with it. He's challenging. He's not afraid to voice his doubts in quite an aggressive way. My third point is, it's really positive and healthy to voice your doubts. Don't take your doubts and just push them and hide them and think, I can't voice these. What will other people think if I do? Thomas, with his best friends and his church family, he said, I'm not going to believe unless this happens. God is always bigger than our doubts, and it's okay to challenge him. And fourth reflection for me is a few days later, 8 days later, Thomas does meet Jesus, the risen Jesus. And who did Jesus single out in that encounter? He says he actually turned. He turned to Thomas and said to him, Thomas, put your finger here in his side. Look at my hands. See the scars. See the wounds in my hands. And put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless anymore. Believe. Jesus met Thomas exactly in the place of his doubts. The challenge that Thomas had laid down in a way, that gauntlet that Thomas had thrown down, Jesus, I'm going to pick that up. And the point that you challenge me on, he says, I'm going to meet you there. Jesus wants to meet us in the very location of our doubts. And then what did he do with Thomas? He called him forward. He said, don't doubt any longer. What did he say? Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. And after that encounter, Thomas doubted, but the perimeters of his faith expanded and grew. God turned Thomas's doubt into an opportunity for his faith to grow and expand.
Thanks,
So
Mark.
Claire, you've been reading as well.
I have. And I think you're right, actually, Mark. It's true that he gets a little bit of a bad press, Thomas, and we single him out for being the one who doubted. But actually, there are a couple of other places in Matthew's Gospel and in Luke's Gospel where the other disciples were filled with doubt as well. There's even one moment when Jesus says to the gathered disciples after his resurrection, why do doubts rise in your minds? So it was not only Thomas, and what I like about this is that it's really permission giving for us. So these guys who had spent 3 years with Jesus, they'd seen him in the flesh, they'd been listening to his teaching, they'd shared some really personal and close moments together. Even these guys who'd seen Jesus still had doubts. So for us, who haven't seen Jesus in the flesh, as it were, it's normal for us as well to be gathered into that kind of place where we also can experience doubt. And I think that's a normal part of faith. As Mark said, it's not about losing our faith, it's about confirming it. And quite often we think to ourselves, if I doubt, if I have questions, then it means I'm losing my faith. But actually, it's about growing deeper in our faith. As Mark said, reaching the perimeters. It's about building really strong foundations because we've allowed those doubts to form questions in our minds, and we've explored those questions in order to have deeper roots and stronger foundations. As Mark said, Thomas didn't hide his doubts. He spoke them out loud to his friends. He didn't shy away from that. Many of you will know, in my own faith journey, I had a season of really, really big doubts and questions. And one of the things that I found really tough is that I didn't find a place where I could speak out that doubt. And we here at Hazelmere Church want to create an environment where we ask one another questions, where we give each other permission as well to speak those doubts out, just like Thomas did, in order to get to a really good place of understanding. It says here in the gospel as well, it was a week later, Thomas spoke out his doubts, But then he didn't hurry for an answer. It's not like he was desperately grasping at something in order to fulfill the questions that he had, in order to answer those questions. He waited. He sat with those doubts for a little while. Now, one of my favourite Christian authors, Pete Greig, in his book God on Mute, said this: if we race through doubts, we risk hurrying to make meaning instead of making time for the light to break in. If we race through doubts, we risk hurrying to make meaning instead of allowing time to let the light break in. And that's what Thomas actually did. He waited for that moment when the light would break in and shed light on those doubts. And that was Jesus himself, wasn't it? As Mark was saying, Jesus himself is the light that broke in. So for us, I think this passage teaches us not to keep our doubts and our questions to ourselves, to find good, trusted Christian friends to talk those through with. It tells us not to hurry for the answer, but allow the mystery of God to really permeate our thinking and our faith. It tells us to wait for the light to break in so that we too can get to that moment where we can say, like Thomas, Jesus, my Lord and my God. Now, in just a few moments, we're going to take communion together, and it is one of the best ways I know of allowing the mystery of faith to come to life, if you like, through some symbolic acts. We say in many of the prayers before communion, great is the mystery of faith. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. So I want to invite you, as we take communion this morning, to allow those doubts to bubble up, to bring them to Jesus as we share in these symbolic acts together this morning.
And as we prepare to have communion, we're going to have a moment of quiet, and then we're going to say actually the words of the Lord's Prayer together. And as we both spoke, there may be doubts that you've got that you need to, in communion, almost in that space, to bring to God this morning. It might be off the back of those prophetic words. It's like, oh, how can I step out? How can I be ready to march? How can I be expectant? I'm doubting that I've got anything to offer. We'll bring those doubts to God. It might be a faith doubt, or it might be a doubt over how God can use you. Let's bring them to God now.